Okay, well, I guess we will get started. First of all, I just wanted to welcome everybody back to our WRLA webinars. It's been a little while since we've hosted one, but we wanted to make sure that we kicked it off with some really great industry information. And I'm very excited to introduce to you parts of the team who are responsible for pulling this together from DMC Recruitment. Stephen and Jillian took the initiative to conduct their first ever salary report. It's information that we definitely need for this industry, and it was solely focused on sales representatives here in the Canadian building materials industry. As an industry association, it's really important for the WRLA to have some of this information as well, and we were very delighted to partner on this piece, one of many surveys that I believe are to come. And our session today will focus heavily on the background, the methodology, and highlight some of the key findings. And we'll also provide the opportunity for a question and answer period. So if there are some questions that you would like to ask, we will be happy to field those and pass on the information. We do have a chat, so feel free to post the questions in there. We'll monitor those as we go. And of course, as with all of our other webinars, we will be recording this and we'll send out a link post-event. So if you would like to share it with any members of your team or want to reference back to it, it certainly can be done. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Steve and Jillian to take over and present the results.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Liz.
So I get just on Liz's point. I mean, I know that people in the webinar format don't necessarily like to speak up and ask questions or kind of get involved on a kind of town hall basis. But please feel free, like love questions as we go through. So if you do have any popping up, please feel free. And I think Liz is going to be monitoring those questions. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. Just as an introduction for anyone that doesn't know us, DMC Recruitment was born in December 2020, a team that was already very much focused on recruiting into the building materials industry. Myself, as one of the partners within the business, I've been in recruitment for 24 years. These numbers are a little bit out of date now. Over 150 placements myself into building materials industry. It's probably nearer 200 now. And I've overseen people in my teams placing, again, that number will be over 1,000 now into the building materials industry. So you do a lot of work with manufacturers, with distributors, and with dealers specifically within building materials, not specifically within Canada. We work across Canada and the US, so we do get visibility of some of the salary differences down there as well. But this survey has been specifically based around the Canadian market. Jillian's my co-host. She's really the brains behind the operation.
I think Seeka's been bought by...
Have we got, there we go. Sorry, I just had a little bit of sound feedback. So yeah, Jillian's the brains behind the operation. She is really here because she's got the data on hand. So whilst the data that we present to you right now is the data that was ultimately presented through the salary survey, obviously you can kind of compare and contrast data in all sorts of different ways. So you could, for example, we could look up, well, what's the average base salary for someone within the windows industry specifically? And obviously there's so many different ways you can chop and change data. We're just not able to present all of that in a salary survey, but kind of live, she can look up data and comparisons and things like that because she's got access to the system. And certainly following this, if anyone's got more specific information that they require, we can do our best to provide that. So yeah. So the survey, first and foremost, the WRLA, Liz was 100% behind us from the instant we suggested it to her. So we do appreciate the WRLA's support in getting this done. I personally felt it was so badly needed. And you could argue the case for lots of different functions across the industry, but sales reps seem to be the one, certainly the one where we're most consistently asked to help out on a recruitment front. And it's certainly the one that, so sales reps are always about arguing how much money they're getting paid or not getting paid. So it kind of felt like the most relevant of the different functions to get after with the survey. So we conducted it in January. We distributed it nationwide. Obviously, the WRLA's database was really useful in doing that. On top of that, our data, I think we reached out to maybe 19,000 people nationwide, something like that. And then obviously we distributed it through the social media channels, etc. as well. So we had a full campaign built, and we had multiple touch points on each person that we reached out to. We were focused on sales reps, but we didn't particularly focus on manufacturer, distributor, dealer, big box, or buying group. We didn't differentiate. We did ask them to tell us where they worked, but we just went after anyone that was a sales rep within the industry, and then we ultimately cataloged where they sat once they responded. Yeah, as I say, it was always as a partnership with the WRLA, and again, we'd really appreciated their help. Some people may be on this call that were in the presentation that we did at the trade show in Winnipeg. So apologies if you're on there. It is kind of the same thing rolled out, because I know a lot of people hadn't been able to come to this presentation previously. And I guess just importantly, we were looking at sales reps that were selling across really all of the different channels within the building materials industry. The respondents that we got are illustrated here, I guess. So the pie chart that you see on the left-hand side talks to the province that they responded from. I would say broadly that's a reflection on the populations across Canada. So I think, statistically, we've probably had a reasonable showing. A little bit soft in Manitoba would be my kind of thoughts on that, and maybe some of the eastern provinces were a little bit soft as well in terms of our response. That's not a reflection on the outreach that we did. We reached out pretty consistently across the country. So, obviously we don't have much control on who fills what in. So yeah, that's where our respondents came from. And then the graph on the right-hand side gives you an idea of who they were selling through to. So you can see that the majority of people responding were sales reps that were selling to the builders and contractors. So 60% of the respondents sold through there. And then the next two biggest categories being selling through to manufacturing or fabrication, or selling to the dealer or the big box, so selling to retail. Our weakest response was in the architecture and design space, but we still got 17% of our respondents coming through there. In terms of total respondents, I'm not quite sure the exact number, but it was about 1,300 and something people that were responding. So the good news is that's certainly statistically relevant data that we're playing with. So yeah. So this was probably the most confronting information that we found. When we look at the respondents by gender, obviously, when you look nationwide, the workforce is far more evenly split. But unfortunately, in building materials, and specifically within sales roles within building materials, we're massively underrepresented from a female perspective. And one of the reasons why that might be is, for no reason that I can possibly think of, females averaged base salaries much less than their male counterparts, so 13% less nationwide. And we certainly have statistically relevant information or data to back that number up. So yeah, that kind of sucks. As an industry, we've got to take it on board and do better in that particular area, because you know, we're always complaining that we struggle to get people attracted into the industry. You know, the WRLA and other associations are always so busy trying to put in place programs that will attract people into the industry, yet, you know, it's not particularly attractive place to come into if you're female looking in thinking, well, hang on, I'm going to get paid substantially less than my male counterparts. So yeah, not good numbers. So this is the overview. So this just talks to you in terms of sales reps nationally. What are the numbers that they're looking at? So the base salary came out at 71K with a 35K commission on top. So commission or bonus, however they kind of are paid. So that's the salaried employees. As we would all expect, commission only candidates were substantially better paid. So they came in at an average of 162K. So they're candidates that indicated that they have zero base salary and they're just on 100% commission. 54% of sales reps that we surveyed seemed satisfied with their current compensation, which, you know, I don't particularly think that that's too higher number or lower number. I think that's kind of as you would expect. You know, there's pretty much working in the market. You know, sales reps always think that they could get paid some, you know, better somewhere else. But when it comes down to it, a lot of them are actually pretty happy with what they're getting paid. So it kind of reflects the two sides of the sales rep. They're unhappy and want more, but actually, you know, really at the end of the day, they're relatively satisfied. So 73% receive a car allowance, which kind of again talks to the reps that we were getting, the type of reps that were responding, and the RSP, that's probably the most relevant of the numbers across nationally, so that people can comparatively look and say, you know, is our RSP contribution competitive or not on a national basis.
Stephen, if I could ask a question in regards to the 100% commission roles, what percentage of the respondents actually would be solely based on commission?
Not many. Jillian, you'd know that.
It was a little bit less than 4%, I think 3.9, something like that. Not many at all, but that people that made 100% commission were very, very satisfied, I will say as well. So well, it's 54% overall, but people who made 100% commission, that number was closer to, I think, like 80%.
Wow, well, there's a significant difference between the two, which is why I was asking the question. And would you may not know the answer to this question, but how would that compare to other industries in terms of the commission structure?
Well, it kind of depends which industry that you're going into, but the obvious one that's heavily commission would be the technology sector, and it's soft compared to technology. You know, all those guys out there selling SaaS solutions to you, they're paid a lot more than that. But it's an interesting number, how few. Because if you think about the evolution of this industry, you know, we've kind of moved away from that sales agency model, which actually used to really be, at the end of the day, you know, sales agents were kind of commission only sales reps that were not necessarily employees of the organization. And we've kind of just moved away from that. but it's interesting, you know, they're very satisfied individuals. They're earning very well. Maybe that's why we've moved away. Maybe it's a cheap, you know, because it's a cheaper option for employers. They've kind of moved away from that model. So who knows?
Okay, well, thank you.
No problems. Okay, so this is a little bit confusing at first glance. It's Gillian's favorite graph, so please bear with me.
It is.
What we're looking at here is the considerations for sales reps when they would be considering another job. So they had to rate what the question kind of said, choose your top 5 in order of considerations you would have when you're looking for a new job. And so what you see, just broadly in terms of the color, the dark green is where they've chosen the like, for example, the top line, they've chosen working environment or culture. Those that are in dark green have chosen that as their #1 priority. Light green or teal would be their #2 priority, and you know, subsequently rolling out to 5th. So I guess what you see really clearly is the #1 priority of reps considering a move is the environment and culture. So whilst this whole presentation is about the compensation structure that we're putting together and being competitive and all of that, actually, remember, most importantly, it's the culture and environment that you're offering. And you know, I'm doing one job right now for a particular organization that are looking for a very difficult skill set in and around the kind of lumber trading world. And actually, their culture and environment is such that when I engage with candidates, they're interested in conversations because they know already of that organization and the culture and team that they have there. So it's a massive selling point for organizations, and something that you do need to remember when you're kind of sitting down going, well, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to pay them? How do we be competitive? Well, actually, the easiest place to start is getting that culture right. Secondly, obviously, earning potential. And you'll see that those two are like pretty much everyone put them as one of their first solutions. And then pretty much everyone included them as at least one of their top 5 choices. So they're huge. A couple of other things to notice as you look through. Benefits is kind of strong, as you would expect, but no one puts it as their first option. So it's kind of an important consideration, but it's never their #1 consideration when they're looking to move. And in terms of other bits and pieces, I don't think there's anything particularly noticeable beyond flexible working. Flexible working for me is kind of unusually high. And my personal perception on that is that, you know, all of this COVID thing and everyone talking about flexible working and work from home and hybrid solutions and all of that, it's kind of top of mind. And so candidates at the moment are talking about that. But I would say, you know, again, working in this market and recruiting loads of reps, like most of them are out on the road anyway, so it's not really a thing in reality. You know, when you compare that to an HR manager job that I'm doing in Toronto, you know, they're all about work from home because, you know, navigating your way around Toronto is quite a different thing compared to if your job's going out to job sites and meeting contractors. Well, you're not really asking for flexible working because you're already kind of out on the road. So I think that's a little bit exaggerated just because people, you know, sit in the news nonstop. So what we did with the data broadly is we said, okay, there is different channels that a rep will sell to, which is really important to us. And then there is also different organizations that they work within. So for example, just to kind of articulate that to you, you know, a rep might work for a manufacturer, but their job might purely be selling to the architect and design channel. Whereas there might be someone working for that same manufacturer whose job is purely selling direct to the contractor, depending on the model of different businesses. And so we wanted to try and compare as relevantly as we could. And so what we did is we've initially looked at all channels, and we compared reps by channel. And then the second part of the presentation, you'll see we ultimately then compared them by organization type. So this is the channels. The first channel being architecture and design. This was well represented from the female, or better represented from a female split, so much higher than average. As a reflection, I think, on where we hire architecture and design reps from, being a lot of people come through the showroom and then kind of go out on the road from there. It's noticeably lower pay for those first 5 years, and then they seem to lift up in terms of their average compensation. So, and then, you know, relatively consistent for those next 10 years of career. So, you know, I guess the most relevant numbers being kind of 71, 72 on a base, and then around 37 to 40 in terms of their compensation on top. So obviously you're paying more for more experienced rep. And, you know, this is an area that very specifically people move because they've got a Rolodex of contacts in that architecture and design space. So, you know, again, my opinion on that is that there is value in paying for those more senior reps, because they're bringing you access to architect and design firms you may not otherwise have. These guys traveled the most. So, you know, over half of them are spending more than a day's traveling. So, you know, that's, I guess, statistically noticeable. So yeah, and in terms of when we compare them across the country, a very random stat that reps in Ontario are paid less than the rest of the market. I personally find that staggering. We've certainly got enough data to prove that, so it's not just an anomaly where we don't have much data. So I don't really know the answer to that. Maybe someone can put that in notes and give me a reason for that. But yeah, Ontario was the weakest paid compared to the other provinces. And in terms of satisfaction, you know, slightly lower levels of satisfaction in this particular area. Again, talking to my experience, I think the main problem with A&D reps, for the most part, is actually tracking the sales that they make, and actually being recognized for the sale when it actually happens, because obviously we're talking about a relatively long sales cycle. So this channel's the selling to builders and contractors. Obviously there'll be a lot of dealer reps within here, and I know obviously the WRLA's member base is predominantly dealers, albeit I don't know whether we've also got manufacturers and distributors on here listening. But yeah, you know, you'll kind of reflect on this and say, okay, well, you know, there's consistent growth in terms of the first, you know, few years of their career. So they start off at 56, you know, 5 years later, they're earning another 10 on their base. 5 years after that, they're broadly earning another 10 on their base as well. And then it seems to kind of hit a ceiling at that point. But yeah, it looks like relatively consistent and steady growth of their income over the years. And, you know, obviously longevity is kind of rewarded in this space. Satisfaction levels were pretty much on average, just slightly slightly lower. And within Quebec, we see that Quebec's kind of the anomaly here in terms of the average compensation. So Quebec reps that are selling to that builder and contractor market are paid noticeably more than others across the country. Ontario, Prairies, BC, there's really East Coast, there's nothing between the rest of them. So this is looking at reps that sell into either dealers or into the big box. So basically selling to retailers. So a lot of these reps will come through from the two-step distribution or potentially the manufacturers directly. So again, we see these guys kind of steady compensation growth. Yeah, in terms of once they kind of get past that 10-year mark, they start to earn noticeably more. But again, we've got that kind of flat profile beyond the 15 years. So again, that starts to top out. I'm not surprised, because the reality is reps will either continue to be professional sales reps for the rest of their career at that point, or they'll have moved on and start to get into management positions, which is where their compensation obviously would be noticeably higher. Half of these people are traveling over 20% of their time. So, I'm kind of surprised at that number personally. I would have thought that would have been higher in terms of reps that are getting out and visiting retail locations, albeit this is the area that we would have got responses from the kind of national accounts or account manager roles as well. Happy reps in this channel. So people generally are pretty satisfied with their current compensation. And again, Quebec is the highest, albeit, Ontario, Quebec are pretty neck and neck in terms of their total compensation. So, yeah. Manufacturers, again, current nice steady career growth, particularly well rewarded when you start to get into that 10+ years experience, and noticeably kind of dropping off a little bit. But those peak earning years, 10 to 15 years into the job, this is a well-paid sector, yeah, few females in the manufacturers. Sorry, selling to the manufacturers. Sorry, that was an error there. So yeah, few females in this particular area. This would arguably house slightly more technical reps in this particular space. In terms of BC, it's well represented here in terms of the compensation, and Quebec, again, relatively consistently strong. Yeah, Prairie's a little bit more noticeably lower. Again, happy reps in this sector. Okay, so now we move on to sectors. So again, get our heads around this. We're no longer looking at channel. Now we're looking at where do they work? So who do they work for? And so in this case, we're talking about retailers. So this will be big box and dealers. We didn't differentiate that. Again, I guess learnings as we go through. This is our first salary survey. I will likely split that out next time round so that we can see a differentiation between the big box store and the dealer. But obviously, a lot of these people are kind of tied to the retail environment, so much less on the travel. The overall base salaries are consistently lower than the average across building materials across the whole country. Overall, commission is relatively competitive in that particular area. So slightly less happiness in here, and we've guessed at this, but we've kind of guessed the fact that there's lower base and higher commission. You know, sometimes that gets sales reps a little bit grumbly in terms of their happiness. So we're kind of guessing at that being a sticking point for them. I would also say, and we'll get into this in a second, but you know, this is kind of high risk when the manufacturers come along and they've got much higher base salaries, you know, where you're lower on the base salary, but ultimately you've got candidates with or employees with relevant industry knowledge, knowledge of the products, knowledge of the industry. You know, they're kind of ripe for the picking from the manufacturers. So yeah, I think that's a threat. And so here you see the manufacturers, so people working for manufacturers, and you'll notice from the graphs the base salary is just noticeably stronger. If I just flick back and forward, you've got 53, 72, and 64 across BC, Prairies, and Ontario, and 62 Quebec. And then, you know, look, we're 61, 57, 84, and 84 in the as they go along. And then again, I guess to more direct comparison, look at the differences in the provinces. You know, we're up and around that 80 number. So yeah, good strong pay, or at least stronger base pay in this particular sector. So the distributor rep, it's kind of interesting in itself. People working for distributors, there seems to be like a price for a distributor rep, which, you know, broadly is around the 60, you know, early 60s, and then that's kind of it. So I show you the years that we're familiar with now. So, you know, slightly softer the first 5 years, but then pretty consistent after that. And then if you look at the variation across the country, you know, they're within kind of 5 of each other. The price of a rep pretty much looks like that. The only noticeable difference here is Quebec are paid noticeably more in terms of the commissions within the distribution market. So relatively happy reps, but on the whole, distribution seems to pay less than the rest of the industry. So again, if I'm running a distributor, I'm looking over my shoulder on those manufacturer rep roles, because you know, particularly as the market's getting to the point where people are almost desperate for people, you know, if I'm a manufacturer, I'm just going hunting in the distributors to see if I can get myself someone that can make the transition. So my takeaways, first and foremost, remember to look at the working environment that you offer. Frankly, it's the cheapest way to make yourself attractive to a potential employee. So, you know, that's tied to employer brand and kind of the word of mouth that's created around your business. And you want something that you can be proud of and draws people towards you. Focus on diversity. It's my big regret on this survey that I didn't do race. And the reason that I didn't survey race was that I kind of have never done a survey like this before. And so when we were kind of looking at the initial categorization questions, I actually thought, well, why is it my business to ask someone what race they are? I almost didn't put sex in there. I don't know really why I did. But as a result, the findings were so dramatic in terms of the variation in compensation between male and female, it left me thinking, you know, on the race side of things, I would bet my bottom dollar that it is incredibly poor representation, and I would be interested to know whether there was a you know, a variance. But yeah, look, either which way, whether we're talking about race or sex, you know, do focus on that diversity piece and make sure that everyone's being paid for the job that they do in a fair way. Pay people what they're worth. You know, hopefully this data gives you some form of context and gives you, you know, look, I really hope it arms both employers and employees to have sensible conversations about what their compensation structure is. That's, you know, really important to me in terms of building this survey. And also, you know, look over your shoulder would be my kind of comment, you know, particularly distribution and in retail. Employees are at threat for the bigger paying manufacturing companies. And so I guess that circles us back to number one. Make sure if you're not going to pay them the same as the manufacturer because your business model doesn't allow you, make sure that you're at least offering them the working environment that they want to stick with you and give you loyalty, and they want to come to work on a day, because, you know, there is more to life than money, and so recognizing that and getting that right is important. But you know, you shouldn't be naive to the threat if your compensation is out of line. So that's me. Do we have any other questions?
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was awesome. There's a few things there that caught me by surprise as well. But would you be able to elaborate maybe on some of the budgets in terms of what sales some of these reps were responsible for? Just I remember having that conversation with you, and you were surprised to see some of those numbers.
Yeah, Gillian, I think we've got access to that, haven't we? So
while I have it right here. So we didn't ask specific numbers. We kind of asked it more in terms of categories. So what's the annual revenue that you're accountable for? And then the groupings were sort of 0 to 2 mil, 2 to 4 million, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, etc. And the majority of them were in the 0 to 2 million or 2 to 4.
And did that vary across geography, Gillian?
I can check.
I told you all technical questions go to Gillian.
Let me.
She's a good resource to have.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wait for it to load.
Well, yeah, last night I was having this conversation with my husband. He works in the agricultural industry, and we were talking about the compensation piece, and you know, it was just interesting to compare how things are different in various industries. But we did talk mostly about some of their US counterparts and how they have to factor in for them a little bit of extra just because of some of the health concerns and benefits. So we're definitely a little bit more fortunate up here.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's fair in terms of the total packages that people get. You know, people, I guess, you've got to look at compensation from a full total compensation perspective, rather than it's just not about the easy thing when you look at a salary survey is to look at base and bonus and not remember, well, is my gas getting paid? You know, that's a huge thing, and it's a much bigger thing right now, with the prices going up. You know, what are my benefits? You know, again, people kind of see it as important, but I'll tell you, I mean, you know, I don't know how many placings I've made this year, but I don't know, we must be up at 20 or 30. I cannot remember one asking me to kind of break down the benefit program and see whether there's value in that. Interesting, really, that people don't. They're kind of like, have you got benefits? Great. And actually, as a business owner, I know that benefits make up a really big chunk of cost. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the level of value that employees put on having exceptional benefit programs, or at least if you've got an exceptional benefit program, you need to sell it really well.
Well, I think that's also one of those things that until you realize what you've got, because sometimes when you move over, you think benefits are benefits, but not all benefits are built the same. And you realize, as you get, get older and have access to them, and you start to realize just how much value those have. Yeah, particularly if your employer is paying for most of them, right?
That's it. Where's my my monthly massage gone?
I'm just looking at these groupings for revenue accountability. It's pretty evenly distributed among the provinces. The only main variation is Quebec has had a bunch more respondents accountable for over 10 million. So about 25% of the people responding from Quebec are accountable for over 10 million. So that kind of makes sense, because when we were going through the different channels and different sectors, in almost all of them, Quebec was making the most. Yes. So it sort of makes sense that they would be accountable for a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And then I would say on average, a little bit less revenue accountability in Saskatchewan, but nothing crazy. It's pretty well distributed, I would say.
So one more question to build on that is, were there big differences in budget responsibilities by channel?
Maybe, let me see. I'm just gonna wait for that to load for a second.
It's kind of amazing that the product that we're using. I mean, it's no secrets what we're using. The salary, what's it called? Salary Monkey, Survey Monkey. Thank you. It's kind of an amazing tool that you can chop and change all of that data. So as I said at the beginning, you can kind of go, right, well, I want BC, manufacturers selling windows. What are they paying now? It's totally dependent on whether we've got statistically relevant data, right? So the minute you're really drilling it down, it depends on the number of respondents that we've had in any one of those locations. But we're really able to drill into that data quite specifically.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of variation depending on channels. So the manufacturing channel, about 25% of people selling to that channel are responsible for under 2 million revenue accountability. And then the same thing with builders and contractors, same thing with architecture, design, and engineering. It's about 25%. And then the other interesting thing there is for the LBM retail and big box, they have a bit of a higher revenue accountability. So 21% of those channel respondents are accountable for over 10 million. Other than that, it's pretty evenly distributed, but
that's kind of interesting as well. I would say that we've got a reasonable number of account managers and national account managers responding in that particular segment.
Yeah, and I believe, were we saying earlier that they were seeing a little bit lower? It was lower base salary, higher commission, right? For that channel. Yeah, they have actually the highest revenue accountability. So almost a quarter accountable for over 10 million. And then in the other three channels, that number goes down more so to 10 or 15%.
Interesting.
Yeah. Again, another learning on that particular point. We have got the data, so maybe we subsequently will release a paper, just an addition to what we've done in terms of breaking down that revenue accountability, because it's kind of a third way to look at it, isn't it, in terms of tying how much you're selling to how much you're earning. So.
Well, and I think that's really good information, because oftentimes, there was a little bit of ESP there. You read my mind about a follow-up piece, but we often will get asked questions, especially if there's, on the retail side, if you're in the process of developing maybe some new positions that involve some sales staff that you have not had before. One of the challenges that some of those folks run into is not having a baseline of understanding of So what do I offer? Do I offer a truck allowance? And, you know, that's not even an easy question to answer depending on which community you're in. If you're, let's say, you know, living in Kamloops versus living in, you know, the town of Penhold in Alberta, you're looking at two very different communities and demographics. So at that point, you're comparing apples to oranges. But this is good information in terms of maybe creating some of those baselines and getting some understanding.
I had a hilarious conversation when I placed a candidate doing the Northern Alberta region, and the manufacturer that we were placing her with, they gave company cars, and she is like, I am not driving those roads in a car. I've hit 2 moose in the last 6 months. I am not driving in anything other than a big flipping F-150, you know, and so they had to kind of bend on that because the reality of the environment that she was in, she just needed that. So
yeah, understandable.
Completely.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but I would be happy to share. We'll share this webinar post event, and of course, I'll also send email addresses and phone numbers, or the coordinates, I guess, for both Stephen and Jillian in case there's anything else that you wanted to ask further. We'll continue. If there's any other information you'd like to see in this type of format, please let us know, as we'd be happy to share that. And in the meantime, have a really great afternoon, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. And thank you so much to our presenters for all the work that you did to pull this together, and of course to present this information today, and for answering all of our questions.
You're welcome.